It was 3 in the morning, the kind of hour when even the city forgets to breathe. No lights, no noise, just the hum of the clock and the sound of my own heart trying to fill the silence. Funny thing about silence, it can be deafening when you've spent your whole life surrounded by noise. I'd been through battles, both on screen and off, but that night, sitting alone in my chair, I realized I'd never really faced the quiet. My body was tired, but my mind was restless, chasing shadows that didn't exist. So, I reached for something I hadn't touched in a long time, my old Bible. The leather was cracked, the pages worn soft like the hands of an old friend. It had been sitting there for years, waiting patiently, like God Himself was saying, "I knew you'd come back eventually." I didn't open it for answers. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I just knew that everything outside of that moment, fame, money, applause, had stopped meaning much when the night got this quiet. The first verse my eyes landed on was Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. Now, I've spent a lifetime doing the opposite of still, moving fast, talking loud, chasing something just out of reach. But those words, they hit like a bullet straight to the soul. Be still. No, not think, not plan, just be. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from the world slowing down, but from you finally stopping long enough to listen. You see, stillness isn't easy for people like us, the ones who built their lives on motion. But that night, I learned something. Silence isn't empty. It's full of truth, of memory, of the voice you've been drowning out for years. As I sat there, I started to see my life like one long scene, the kind you'd shoot in a single take, no edits, no retakes, just the raw, honest version of who you are when no one's watching. And I wondered, when did we stop talking to God and start scrolling instead? When did peace become something we had to earn instead of receive? Maybe that's what the Bible had been trying to tell me all along, that stillness isn't weakness, it's wisdom. That sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with fists or words, but in the quiet places of the heart. That night, I didn't find all the answers. But I found something better, the courage to sit still, to face myself, and to listen. Because in a world that never stops shouting, maybe the bravest thing a man can do is sit in silence and finally hear the whisper he's been running from. I opened my Bible that night, and the first words I saw were simple but heavy. Be still and know that I am God. I'd spent my whole life doing the opposite of that, riding hard, pushing forward, filling every quiet moment with noise. Action had always been my comfort zone. You stop moving, you start thinking, and sometimes that's scarier than any gunfight, but those words stopped me cold. Be still. Not move, not fix, just be. It felt like God Himself was telling me, sit down, kid, you've done enough running. For years I'd confused motion with purpose. I'd thought success was something you chased. That peace was waiting at the finish line. But it never was. Every movie, every award, every headline, it all kept me busy, not fulfilled. That night, sitting there in the dark, I realized stillness takes more courage than any spotlight ever could. Because when the noise fades, there's no applause left to drown out your thoughts. There's just you, bare, unguarded, and honest. That's when you start seeing who you really are, not who the world thinks you are. I remember once on a film set in the desert, the wind died down so completely you could hear your own heartbeat. It felt unnatural at first, like the earth had stopped spinning. But after a while, that silence started to feel holy. I think that's what stillness is. It's the desert of the soul, empty enough for God's whisper to echo. The verse didn't ask me to perform or achieve. It just asked me to know. To trust that maybe I didn't need to have all the answers. That maybe peace wasn't something earned, but something received. The truth is, we live in a world that worships noise, notifications, opinions, applause. But God doesn't shout over chaos. He waits for it to die down. And when it finally does, you start hearing things you never noticed before. your own breathing, your regrets, your gratitude, and sometimes a voice reminding you that you were never meant to carry it all alone. That night, I didn't find a thunderbolt of revelation. What I found was quieter, steadier, the kind of peace that doesn't end when the morning comes. I learned that stillness isn't the absence of life, it's where life finally makes sense. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to fight harder or speak louder, it's to stop, breathe, and let God remind you that you're not in charge. And the strange thing is, when you finally stop trying to control everything, I've spent most of my life playing warriors, men who charged into chaos, guns drawn, eyes sharp, hearts hard. I knew how to win a fight, how to stare down danger, how to look unbreakable on screen. But one night, reading Proverbs 16:32, better a patient man than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city, I realized I'd been getting manhood all wrong. The world teaches you that strength is about domination, about conquering mountains, enemies, or maybe your own fears. But that verse hit me like a quiet punch to the gut. Maybe real strength isn't about how hard you hit, it's about how long you can stand still without losing yourself. Maybe being a man isn't about taking cities, it's about learning to control the storm inside. You see, Hollywood loves the image of the tough guy, the man who doesn't flinch, doesn't break, doesn't feel. I've worn that mask for years, but behind it I learned something ugly. When you never slow down, your victories start to feel hollow. I've known men who could win any fight but couldn't hold their temper. Men who commanded crowds but couldn't command their own heart. Patience, though it's different, it's the kind of strength that doesn't roar. It endures. It's the man who walks away when his pride says to stay and swing. It's the father who listens instead of shouts. It's the old cowboy who knows when to holster his gun. There was a time on set, years ago, when a young actor kept missing his lines. Everyone was frustrated. My instinct was to bark orders, fix it fast. But something stopped me. I sat down beside him, told him I'd done the same damn thing my first time. His shoulders eased. He nailed the next take. That wasn't weakness, it was restraint. Patience gave him courage where pressure would have broken him, and that's when I started to understand. The strongest men aren't the loudest in the room. They're the ones who can carry their fire quietly. Life will hand you 1,000 battles, but only one war that matters, the one between your will and your wisdom. Anyone can act tough when the crowd's watching, but can you stay calm when nobody's cheering? Can you forgive when you'd rather fight? Can you wait when everything in you wants to rush ahead? That's the kind of man God shapes, the kind who wins without violence, leads without pride, and loves without fear. So now when I hear that verse, better a patient man than a warrior, I think of all the years I spent trying to look strong, when all I really needed was to be strong. Real manhood isn't about conquering others, it's about mastering yourself. And once you do that, you don't need to prove a thing. When you're young, you think life is a fistfight, you swing hard, you take hits, and you keep standing just to prove you can. But as the years stack up, you learn that not every battle needs a winner, and not every fight deserves your strength. One night, I opened the Bible and read about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane alone, praying, knowing what was coming. That scene stopped me cold. The strongest man who ever lived didn't pick up a sword. He knelt. He surrendered. And in that moment I saw something I'd missed my whole life. Surrender isn't defeat, it's wisdom. It's trust in something greater than your own will. For decades I fought everything, people, expectations, myself. I thought control was strength. But the truth is, control is just fear wearing armor. Real strength is letting go. I've seen tough men crumble not from pain but from pride. They couldn't sit still long enough to face the ghosts inside. I used to be one of them. I tried to outwork the memories, outtalk the guilt, outshoot the silence. But demons don't die in the noise, they wait for you in the quiet. And sooner or later, you've got to sit with them, look them in the eye and say, you don't own me anymore. That's what surrender really is. It's laying down the sword, not because you've lost, but because you've finally understood the fight was never yours to win. There was a time I thought being tough meant carrying everything alone. I wore pain like a badge of honor. But one night, sitting in the dark with that old Bible open, I realized that God doesn't need your toughness. He needs your trust. You can't heal while you're still holding on to the blade that cut you. You've got to open your hands and let Him take it. And when you do, something strange happens. The weight doesn't disappear, but it starts to feel lighter. You stop trying to control every scene, every outcome, every ending, and you start letting the director run the film. You see, surrender isn't giving up, it's handing over the wheel. It's saying, I don't know the way, but I'll keep walking. And the older I get, the more I see that peace doesn't come from winning battles. It comes from trusting the one who already did. Maybe that's the hardest lesson a man can learn. You spend your youth trying to prove how strong you are, and your old age learning that real strength was never in your fists, it was in your faith. There's something about that old Bible. It doesn't just tell stories. It tells your story back to you. Every time I open it, it feels like holding a mirror that doesn't show my face, but my soul. The pages don't flatter, they reveal. That night I turned to Ephesians 4:31. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. I read it once, twice, maybe 3 times, because it felt like the verse had my name written in the margins. Bitterness, anger. I'd carried those like medals, proof that I'd survived, proof that I was tough. But the truth is, they were chains disguised as armor. You don't notice how heavy resentment is until you start to set it down. I thought about the people who'd wronged me, the ones I'd sworn never to forgive. I thought about the grudges I kept alive just to remind myself I'd been right. But holding on to anger doesn't make you strong, it just makes you tired. And that night, I realized the Bible wasn't trying to shame me. It was trying to free me. It wasn't a rule book, it was a reflection. Every verse showed me a piece of who I was, who I'd been, and who I still could be if I learned to let go. I remember sitting there, staring at my own hands. Those hands had held guns, directed movies, shaken the hands of presidents, but they'd also held on to pride far too long. I whispered a prayer, not the rehearsed kind, just a quiet, broken one. God, teach me to be better than I was yesterday. There was no lightning, no voice from the heavens, but I felt something shift, like a weight sliding off my chest. Maybe that's how peace really comes, not as a roar, but as a whisper that says you can rest now. The more I read, the more I saw that the Bible isn't just about saints and sinners, it's about all of us stumbling somewhere in between. It shows you your past, so you can make peace with it, your flaws so you can face them, and your potential so you don't give up on it. It's not there to make you religious, it's there to make you real. That night I understood something I'd missed for decades. You can't outrun what you won't confront. And sometimes the greatest strength a man can show is the humility to look in that mirror and finally say, all right, Lord, I see it. Let's start again. There's a kind of tired that no amount of sleep can fix. I learned that the hard way. You can rest your body, but your soul, that's a different story. One night, I opened the Bible to Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I'd read that verse before, probably 100 times. But that night it hit me like a truth I'd been running from my whole life. I used to think rest was what you earned after working hard, after proving yourself, after fighting your way to the top. But what I found in those words was different. It wasn't about exhaustion. It was about surrender. The kind of rest that heals your heart, not just your muscles. The kind that doesn't knock you out, it wakes you up. You see, I've lived in a world built on noise. Directors shouting, cameras flashing, crowds cheering, people chasing louder applause, brighter lights, faster recognition. But noise doesn't bring peace, it just drowns out the ache that peace is trying to heal. I used to believe success would quiet that ache, that if I achieved enough, maybe the noise would finally sound like meaning. But meaning doesn't live in motion, it lives in stillness, it lives in grace. Grace isn't something you earn by being good enough, it's something that finds you when you finally stop pretending to be. It's born in the hard places and heartbreak and failure and those long nights when you realize the world can give you everything but peace. Grace grows in conviction, not comfort. It's what happens when God says, "You've done enough fighting, now let me carry the weight." And if you're stubborn like I was, you'll fight him on that too until you can't anymore. I remember sitting on my porch after a long day, the kind of day where everything looked fine on the outside, but inside I felt empty. The sun was setting slow, the world quiet for once. And in that quiet I felt something gentle like a whisper saying, "You don't have to prove anything anymore. That's grace. Not thunder, not drama. Just truth, spoken softly enough that only a humbled heart can hear it." I've come to believe that purpose doesn't shout. It waits. It waits for the noise to die down, for the applause to fade, for you to stop trying to be someone the world will remember and start becoming the person God designed you to be. The world will hand you success. God offers you peace. And if you ever have to choose, take the peace. Because grace, quiet, undeserved, unearned grace is where the noise ends and real life finally begins. I used to think pride was fuel, the thing that kept you standing when the world tried to knock you down. But over time, I realized pride isn't strength, it's armor that keeps the light out. One night, I came across a verse that hit me like a clean shot. God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. James 4-6. I'd spent a lifetime trying to be the man in control, the one calling the shots, trusting my instincts, my gut, my will, and sure, it got me far. But it also built walls so high that not even grace could climb over. I thought pride protected me. Turns out, it only kept me alone. There's a line in Proverbs 3-5 that says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." That one stung too. Because if I'm honest, I'd always leaned hard on my own understanding. My career, my choices, my mistakes, they all came from trusting my own map. But life has a way of reminding you that even the best maps can lead you off the road. I've learned that trusting God isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Because sometimes what feels like losing control is actually gaining direction. I remember being on a film set once, watching a young actor struggle through a scene. He wanted to prove himself so badly that he wouldn't take direction. Every time I tried to guide him, he pushed harder, insisting he knew better. I saw myself in him, determined, defiant, proud. When the day ended, I pulled him aside and told him something I wish someone had told me earlier. "Kid, pride will make you miss your best shot." A week later, he came back, humbled, open, ready to listen, and he nailed it. That's when I realized humility doesn't weaken you, it sharpens you. It clears the fog pride creates. You see, pride builds walls so you don't get hurt. Humility builds bridges so you can heal. The proud man says, "I'll do it my way." The humble man says, "Show me a better one." And the difference between those two? One stays stuck, the other moves forward. The world tells you to trust yourself, but I've lived long enough to know that your instincts can't always see the storm ahead. Faith can. Pride says, "I know the way." Humility says, "I'll follow the one who does." Now, when I look back, I see how many doors I closed because I was too proud to admit I was wrong. But grace has a way of breaking through those walls when you finally kneel instead of stand tall. The older I get, the more I understand this simple truth. Strength isn't about having all the answers, it's about trusting the one who does. In Hollywood, everything's built around being seen, bright lights, red carpets, applause that fades as fast as it starts. For most of my life, that was the measure of success. The louder the crowd, the greater the man. But one night, reading the Gospel of Matthew, I came across words that cut through all that noise. "The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." I sat there staring at that verse, realizing I'd spent decades chasing a kind of greatness that disappears when the cameras turn off. The Bible was talking about a different blueprint altogether, one that doesn't shine in the spotlight but glows quietly in the dark. You see, the world hands you trophies for being seen. God hands you peace for being unseen. I used to think the two were the same, but they're worlds apart. In Hollywood, we're taught to compete, to climb higher, to make sure everyone knows our name. But what's the point of being celebrated if your soul feels empty when the crowd goes home? The Bible showed me that the greatest men aren't the ones standing on the stage, they're the ones sweeping it when no one's looking, the ones who lift others instead of themselves. I remember being on a set years ago when a lighting crew member dropped a piece of equipment and froze, terrified he'd ruined the take. Everyone was frustrated. Instead of yelling, I walked over, helped him pick it up, and said, "You okay, kid?" He nodded, eyes wide. Later that day, he told me nobody had ever done that for him on set before. That stuck with me. It made me wonder, when did we start believing that kindness makes us small? When did we forget that leadership isn't about being above people, but beside them? The truth is, service doesn't take away your power, it reveals it. It's easy to be admired, it's harder to be genuine. Anyone can act strong when the cameras are rolling. But can you serve when no one's filming? Can you do good when there's no audience, no credit, no applause? That's where real character lives. Now, when I think about success, I don't picture the trophies gathering dust on a shelf. I think about moments that don't make headlines, the quiet acts, the hidden sacrifices, the hands that help when no one's watching. Greatness, I've learned, isn't about how many people know your name. It's about how many lives are better because you showed up. And maybe that's the kind of legacy that never fades, the kind that echoes long after the lights go out. Forgiveness was a word I never cared much for. To me, it always sounded like letting someone off the hook. And if I'm being honest, I like my grudges. They made me feel justified, strong, in control. But one night, flipping through my Bible, I landed on Matthew 6:14-15. For if you forgive others when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive yours. I read that and felt something twist inside me. Forgive to be forgiven. That's not a deal, it's a mirror. It doesn't point at the person who hurt you, it points straight at you. I started thinking about all the faces I'd carried in my head for years, the people who lied, betrayed, disappointed. I'd built whole rooms in my mind for them, places where I could replay the anger over and over like an old movie reel. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't punishing them, I was keeping myself locked in the theater. Every time I held on to bitterness, I chained myself to a moment that no longer existed. And that night, I realized forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else, it's the key that frees you from your own prison. I remember an old friend once said something that stuck with me. Holding a grudge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other guy to die. That's the truth of it. I'd spent too long swallowing anger, expecting it to hurt someone else. But it never does. It just eats at you slowly. I started whispering the names of people who'd hurt me. Some I hadn't spoken to in decades. "I forgive you," I said, not because they deserved it, but because I needed peace more than payback. And when I did, it felt like chains snapping loose one by one. You see, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's not saying what happened was right. It's saying it no longer has power over you. It's courage, plain and simple. The kind that doesn't show up in fight scenes or speeches, but in quiet moments when you finally drop the weight you've been carrying for years. It's choosing peace over pride. The world teaches you to hold on to your pain, your anger, your story, but God teaches you to let go, because the truth is you can't carry grace and grudges at the same time. One will always push the other out, and I'll tell you this, the moment you finally forgive, the world looks different, lighter, freer, like stepping out into the morning after a long dark night. That's not weakness, that's redemption. And it starts the moment you stop looking backward and finally let yourself walk free. It took me nearly a lifetime to realize that God doesn't shout, He whispers. And you don't hear whispers in the noise, you hear them in the stillness. One night, I was reading 1 Kings 19:12, where it says that when Elijah waited for God, he wasn't in the wind or the earthquake or the fire, but in the gentle whisper. That hit me hard. I'd spent most of my life looking for God in the big moments, the victories, the applause, the near misses that felt like miracles. But he wasn't there. He was waiting in the quiet, in the spaces I used to fill with pride and noise. The truth is, you can't hear God when you won't stop talking. And I'd been talking my whole life on camera, in interviews, in arguments. I thought I was in control because I was loud. But the older I got, the more I realized the voice that really changes you isn't the one that commands, it's the one that convicts. Psalm 139 says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts." That verse scared me the first time I read it. Because letting God search your heart means letting him into the places you've buried for years. The regrets, the mistakes, the parts of you you'd rather keep hidden under success. I used to think strength was about keeping those doors locked, but it's not. It's about opening them and letting the light in. That's what the whisper does. It doesn't condemn you. It exposes you so you can heal. I remember a night on set, years ago. We'd finished a long day of shooting. Everyone had gone home, but I stayed behind, sitting under the lights after they'd dimmed. It was quiet. No sound except the creak of the stage boards beneath me. And in that silence I felt something calm but powerful. A voice, not outside me, but inside, saying, "You can stop pretending now." It wasn't guilt, it was grace. Like a doctor telling you the pain's finally healing because you stopped fighting the treatment. That's what God's whisper sounds like. Not thunder from the sky, but truth spoken softly enough to reach the soul. You see, the whisper isn't there to comfort you, it's there to change you. It reminds you of the things you've ignored, the apologies you never gave, the dreams you buried out of fear. It strips away everything false until all that's left is who you really are and who you're still meant to. That's the power of silence. It turns into a sacred place where God repairs what the world broke. And when you finally stop running long enough to listen, you find that the whisper you've been waiting for was always waiting for you. I used to think strength meant control, keeping your hands tight on the wheel, making sure every scene went exactly the way you planned. But life has a way of proving you wrong. One night, I found myself staring at Isaiah 30:15. In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength. Those words hit me like a slow sunrise, steady, silent, unstoppable. I'd spent decades chasing control, believing if I just worked harder, planned better, or pushed longer, I could steer my way through anything. But that verse told me a different kind of truth. Real strength isn't about control. It's about surrender. It's trusting the road, even when you can't see the map. There was a time in my life when everything looked perfect from the outside, success, fame, a full schedule that left no room for silence. But deep down I was running on fumes. I kept directing my own story, rewriting every mistake, reshooting every regret. I wanted life to obey my cue, to follow my direction. But that's not how it works. Sooner or later, you realize you're not the director, you're the actor, and the best thing you can do is trust the writer who sees the whole script. 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." That line changed everything for me. Weakness isn't failure, it's space for grace. It's where God fills the gaps you've been trying so hard to hide. I remember once being on a film set where everything went wrong, equipment failed, weather turned bad, the whole crew frustrated. I was about to lose it, ready to force the day back into shape. But then I stopped, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "Maybe it's not supposed to go my way today." Funny thing is, once I let go, things started falling into place. Not perfectly, but peacefully. That's what faith looks like. It's not blind, it's trusting that the one who wrote the story knows how it ends. As dawn broke that morning while I read those verses, I realized something simple but freeing. Life isn't a film to control, it's a journey to walk. Faith isn't knowing every line ahead, it's trusting the next one will make sense when you get there. The strongest men I've met aren't the ones who fight hardest, They're the ones who rest hardest in God, in truth, in quiet certainty that they're not alone on the set. So now, when life goes off script, I don't panic. I just whisper, "All right, Lord, your turn." Because surrender doesn't mean losing the story. It means letting it finally unfold the way it was written all along. There comes a point in every man's life when the lights dim, the applause fades, and you're left sitting alone with the question that never stops echoing, what was it all for? I've stood on more stages than I can count, held trophies that once meant the world to me, seen my name lit up in places I never thought I'd reach. But now, looking back, I can tell you something those lights don't show you. Fame burns fast, and fortune fades quicker than you think. Ecclesiastes says, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. When I first read that, I thought it sounded hopeless. But the older I got, the more I understood what Solomon was saying. He wasn't telling us that life doesn't matter. He was warning us that life without God doesn't matter. You can build empires, you can win awards, but if your soul's empty, you've gained nothing that lasts. I've buried friends, said goodbye to family, watched time strip away everything you thought was permanent. And yet, through all that loss, something beautiful remains. Faith, not the kind you recite, but the kind you live. The kind that holds your hand in the dark and whispers, "This isn't the end." Jesus said in John 14:2, "In my Father's house are many mansions. I go to prepare a place for you." I've seen mansions built out of marble and gold, but none of them could compare to the peace that comes from believing those words. That promise that there's more beyond the curtain changes how you live right now. It makes you stop chasing what shines and start holding on to what's eternal. There was a morning not too long ago when I sat watching the sunrise spill across the horizon. No cameras, no noise, just me and the light crawling over the world like grace finding its way back home. And I realized then that death isn't the closing scene, it's the next chapter. Philippians 1-6 says, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion." That means God's not done with us yet. Even when the credits roll on this side of eternity, the story keeps going on. I've lived long enough to know that the loudest truths are spoken in silence, and the greatest victories don't come with applause, they come with peace. The kind that lets you breathe easy when the world grows quiet. The kind that lets you smile at the sunrise because you know you're right where you're meant to be. So when my time comes, I don't want to be remembered for the roles I played or the awards I won. I just want to be remembered as a man who kept the faith, who finished the race, and who learned that the greatest ending is really just the beginning.